Jason, you started a movement calling men to the front lines of life. Prior to embarking on this mission, though, what did you see happening with men and in society that kind of woke you up that there was a need for what you're doing today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. My life experience has been, I've grown up, I'm 48 years old, so I've grown up over a time where it just has felt like men have just been sort of told to sit down, be quiet, let others take the lead. You had your chance, those kinds of things. And then we're beginning to see, just through the polls and stuff and the trends that we're seeing right now, we're seeing men that are sort of beginning to reject that. I know my own personal experience, through grad school and different places like that, there was just a lot of rejection of just my core identity as a man, and this idea that I didn't have anything to say, I didn't have anything to contribute, and that kind of thing. And I know how that made me feel, and to feel that at scale across the culture the way it is now. I know that we've seen other people like Jordan Peterson talking about that kind of thing, and this idea of where are men at, and then we even see like news articles where organizations are saying, "Hey, where are the men? And men, please come back." But what do those men look like when they come back? That kind of thing. And so we were looking at, last summer we saw a poll that said that young men were returning to church, and I started thinking about it. Well, what happens when all those men come back to the church? What are we going to meet them with, right? What kind of message are we going to meet them with? And for me, that message is that you are vital and you are valuable to culture, and in your absence, evil's going to fill that vacuum. And so uh, here is a framework of formation for you, so that when you come back, you actually know where to start focusing your efforts and stuff. It's not just about showing up in church, but it's about actually identifying areas in your life where you can begin to build strength so that you can stand when the time comes. And uh, you know, in correlation with that, you think about what happened last year with Charlie Kirk, the profound loss that we all felt with that guy when he was killed. People get killed every day, Frank, and we don't feel the loss that way, right? So what was it that we felt? We lost a frontline man that day. We lost a leader. We lost somebody who was strong across the five areas of frontline 21. And because he was strong, he was capable of standing under pressure. He was capable of meeting culture with truth. And he changed hearts because of that. And to feel that loss, I don't think you can fill that vacuum with any one man right now, but I think you can fill it with a lot of men who are building strength in those areas across their lives, so that when the time comes again, we have a million men who could stand in that spot. You can't quell that as much with just the assassination of one person. So that's sort of the origin of it. It all just sort of happened at the same time. A lot of sort of a perfect storm of conviction and opportunity, and uh, and then just recognizing, going back to the Bible as sort of God's blueprint for men, and pulling it from that and saying, I saw all those qualities in Charlie, and we scale that out and meet these young men who are coming back to church with an easy framework that shows them where to begin focusing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's many of the things that I felt and witnessed. I think, I've been deep in this men's space, men's work, field now for 6.5, 7+ years. You mentioned your age, 48. I'm 42 right now. So we kind of came up in kind of the same generation. If you go back to 80s, 90s, there was a lot of masculine examples across media, across even Hollywood, very strong masculine men, the Hollywood kind of superheroes. Like, that was what I kind of grew up and idolized. I mean, I had Arnold posters. I still have Arnold posters in the garage gym today. And if you had asked me through my 20s and 30s, I wouldn't have said that there was a message going against this. I don't know if I was maybe living on the outside. I don't know if I was too busy, caught up in my own life. I do think some of the things I was struggling with, I've admittedly talked about my struggles with porn. And I think there were a couple, I would call them red pill moments for me, that kind of woke me up to this message of suppression and feminization of men. The first one was getting porn out of my life, realizing what that had done and how that had changed my perspective of myself, how it really lowered my confidence, but also how I began to pedestalize the female body. And then there was another one in 2020, just watching the world shut down and men being told that they had to put a diaper on their face. And it's like, I was 36 years old at the time, very, very healthy. Like, if that thing was going to take me out, like, we probably weren't going to survive as a society. So I started to push back against the grain way back in 2020. And then you mentioned Jordan Peterson, massive influence on me and just following his message. So I think that there were all these kind of moments in my life that woke me up. And then I started working directly with men to helping them get out of pornography addiction. And I realized so many of them had been given this message of suppression, of there's no place in the world for you. I'm curious if those moments resonated with you in the same way they did with me, and what your experience was like growing up there as well. And you mentioned the moments that woke you up, but like, did you resonate a lot with what I shared in terms of like how we grew up? And then was there a point in society where you saw that kind of message begin to shift?
Yeah. So just thinking about that same time period, I mean, I grew up with like the Dukes of Hazzard and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Rambo and stuff. And those are your superhuman. Those are sort of your caricatures of masculinity to some degree, right? Going back even before that, I'm old enough to even remember when Burt Reynolds was the epitome of masculinity in Hollywood, right? And he wasn't the muscle bound dude. He had the nice mustache like you're rocking right now, and stuff like that. But he was just sort of an uncompromising male, right? I think that we began to see this feminization of men around the actually in the 60s, right? The beginning of the counterculture, the hippie movements, the long hair, the rejection of conventional masculine signifiers like shorter hair and things like that, right? um and then we saw it pushed even more through the 70s with like the way that men began to get perms and feathering their hair and all these things that women were doing, right? And this idea of moving men more towards um, being feminized to the point that they even looked a little bit feminine, right? To be the pretty boy and that kind of thing. That was the kind of masculine role models. And that's sort of what pushed people like Burt Reynolds to the side, I think. And it made way for prettier men. And then you get to the point where you've got like Brad Pitt and Zac Efron, these guys who are being pushed towards you as the sexiest men alive and things like that, right? And that's not what you see in most men walking across culture. So there's that underlying evolution, I guess, of masculine standards, masculine visual standards across our culture. Simultaneously, beginning to feel the shift from the late 80s and 90s. If you think about Nike as a brand, right? Back in the late 80s, early 90s, you had people like Bo Jackson and Michael Jordan, who were these amazing athletes that were out there getting it done. And it wasn't about masculinity so much, but it was about excellence. It was about getting out there and practicing and putting in the work. And you began to see this shift in the early 2000s where Nike moved from a message of get out there, show up when nobody expects you to, and you don't have to, well, you just get out there and you chase your greatness, right? And then so and you start to see this sort of softening of standards of performance and grit and determination and what those things yield in a man's life when he actually does them into justifying mediocrity. And when you start to justify mediocrity, I think you start to hedge your bets against what your potential is, right? You start to advocate for leaving potential on the table as a man, as an athlete, as a father, as a servant, as a brother, as a husband, all these kinds of things, right? And so for me, just watching the last, 26, 27 years and looking at the patterns, what I'm seeing is that as we move deeper into this idea that there is no truth, that any sort of objective truth is oppression, is the narrative of postmodernism, then what we're doing is we're telling people it's okay to be mediocre. It's embrace your mediocrity, because that is a pathway to true happiness. And we've replaced happiness, we replaced duty, which is us being there for the sake of stewarding these things that are entrusted to us, like families and communities and culture, to making ourselves internally happy. And that manifests in all kinds of craziness now. It's sort of it lets men off the hook for what they were really designed to do, which was to steward, to carry things forward, to serve, to lead through service, right? And then when you bring up the idea of pornography, I remember the first time I saw internet pornography, I was at college, and this is like 96. And this is when chat rooms are still a thing, right? And so I'm in a chat room with my friend, and we're just beginning to explore the internet. And within like my first experience on the internet, somebody's sending me porn. And this is in the school library. And because we didn't have internet at home yet, right? But you think about how fast unmitigated access to pornography came into our culture. And it's only, at least in my state, it's only in the last 6 months or so that they've actually started making it where you can't get to it within a few clicks. You can be a 7-year-old kid and say, yeah, I'm 18. And that 7-year-old kid's in, right? Now they're finally starting to make these websites block themselves and stuff like that. But what effect has that had on sexuality, on the way that men treat women? And we're seeing all those sort of symptoms really begin to come to a head in our culture right now. And men are pulling away, women are angry with men. So it's aggravating issues that have always sort of been there, but it's aggravating to the point that men and women are just disengaging with each other right now. That's a civilizational crisis, brother, when men and women stop pursuing each other, right? So does that make sense where I'm at?
Absolutely, man. And it's interesting mentioning going back to the '60s movement that you were sharing and kind of the feminization of men. Another thing that kind of came on the scene in the '60s was birth control, right? So you had the sexual revolution taking place, and I think the first time in human evolution or history where sex became free of consequence, right? So, speaking to sexual integrity, the pornography conversation we'll obviously get into here today. I'm curious what role you've seen in the commercialization of sex, and just at the same time, sexual revolution, feminism all came on the scene around the same times. And like I said, you gave men access to sex without really having to be responsible for the consequences. What role has all of this played in what we're living through right now?
Yeah. So there's a few things. You had the birth control pill. You also had abortion be legalized. And you really over the course of about a decade there sort of removed the stigma of the unwed mother. You took the responsibility of being a father off of men, which has done that, right? And what we've seen is the gradual sort of devaluation of of a father in our culture, which is a huge problem. And we're feeling the effects of that in children who are growing up without the stabilizing influence of a father right now. And those children are growing up um, not socialized, right? They're not socialized in a way that lets them be productive in society, lets them contribute to society. It almost puts them as outliers to society right now. And there's gigantic portions of our current population across demographics that are feeling that, right? Um, the access to sex immediately devalues the act of sex. It devalues God's plan for sex, because it takes the immediate consequences away of pregnancy and stuff like that, and it turns sex into a recreational thing rather than a formational thing for the husband and the wife, right? I grew up in a time where if you were still a virgin, something was wrong with you. That was the message that we had, right? And so one of the greatest gifts that my wife ever gave to me that I couldn't give back to her was her virginity. And I regret that to this day. And I think we live with the consequences of that as men too, when we uh, when we engage in that kind of thing prior to marriage. We don't have that same bonding experience that the wife does and that kind of thing. And that ultimately creates problems in marriage down the road. It leads to things like pornography if they weren't present before that. But pornography for most men that I understand is that it's actually there prior to the marriage too, right? So it's the thing that they bring into the marriage thinking that marriage will fix them. And I think Christian men come into the marriage believing that if I can just have regular sex, I won't crave porn anymore. But that we once you get in on the other side of marriage, you realize nope, it's not that's not the case. So yeah, there's a lot of things that went on with the sexual revolution, and really, I think that was like the accelerant really for this decline in culture, right? It sort of went hand in hand with postmodernism, where we began to just question truth, right? This idea that truth is any sort of objective truth is oppression. It's a power mechanism, is what the academics have told us over the last several decades, and those academics, it's great to sit around and have those conversations in academia. But I had and forgive my language, but I suspect you probably use this term on your podcast a good bit. I had a professor in college. He called it intellectual masturbation. He said that when you get a group of people like that together and they start talking, it feels good while you're doing it, but at the end, all you have is a mess. You haven't really fixed anything, right? So that's sort of where the academics have led us, and our academy has sort of been taken over by that kind of thought. And so it's led to things like feminism being overrepresented in departments and that kind of stuff. And so that was really like one of the first places where I felt my masculinity under attack was when I was in grad school dealing with professors and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's been interesting in the years working with men in the porn space that, yes, so many of them, the single men will fall into that trap, that lie, right? That a marriage will take care of this. And then you see the married men that have access all they want, and many times, sometimes have great sex lives with their wives, yet still struggle. I think, what we've tried to do is shift the paradigm around your issues with pornography oftentimes have nothing to do with sex at all, other than that's what you're watching. It is rooted in lacking tools of emotional self and physiological self-regulation, right? It's like when you're stressed, because you got it so young, you wired into your nervous system that when I'm stressed, this is a pathway for an outlet. So we've been successful, I think, to one degree of helping people reframe that, and that gives them the removal of shame around it. Because I think many Christian men carry so much guilt and shame that it becomes closeted, and then that shame creates a cycle of guilt, repeated use. You don't feel good, so then it's the only thing that makes you feel good.
And then that carrying all that shame around, carrying all that hidden guilt around and everything, it's an undermining force for just about every other aspect of your life, right? And and really, one of the great conclusions I've come to with working through Frontline 21, and one of the reasons that I included sexual integrity as one of the 5 pillars, is because nothing is going to undermine anything that you built faster than sexual sin becoming public scandal, right? And we've seen that with men who have tremendous legacies, who have, like heroes of the faith, who have made amazing contributions to Christian academics and to Christian understanding and brought people to Christ. And when their sexual scandal gets elevated, nobody, nothing is more compelling to watch than something that's related to sexual scandal in the news, right? You're going to get views that people who never watch the news will tune in for that. And then on top of that, nothing is going to undermine anything good that you ever did more than hypocrisy, right? So when that hypocrisy gets exposed, people love to watch people fall. And what they remember, and I think about people like Ravi Zacharias, this amazing academic Christian who he read the Nietzsche and he read the Marx and he read all the philosophical things that are being espoused right now as the path to freedom for humanity. And he came up with Christian, with Christian counter messages, right? Like this idea of this is actually how you would look at it through as a Christian. And all people really remembered of him now despite the hundreds of books that he wrote and things like that, and all the amazing knowledge that he did, was that he had a hidden or he had a hidden sexual sin in his life, and it destroyed that ministry almost overnight, right? So many other people that we know about. And so when we're calling these young men, and we're calling these men across, even, all the way as old as me and even older than me, right? Calling men to this idea that we have to lead the 21st century back to the good times, and we have to steward culture forward. If we're hiding this corrosive force in our life, we're finding equilibrium with it. We're compartmentalizing it, right? We're saying what I do over here doesn't impact what I do over here. Then we're opening ourselves up to that vulnerability of having the same thing happen to us. And so, uh, sexual integrity is, it's one of the things, whether it's just your thoughts, or you're actually, looking at porn, or you're engaging in affairs, or whatever it is, right? It's a time bomb waiting to go off in your life. And the bigger that your platform gets, whatever it is, if it's a family, if it's a ministry, if it's something like a podcast, if it's a brand, whatever that is, when it gets big enough, you're gonna catch the enemy's attention, and that's when he's gonna blow it up for you. So you need to get that out early, and yeah, it's not easy by any stretch to do that.
Well, sexual integrity is one of the core 5 values that you guys talk about at Frontline 21. But let's go back. So you mentioned you begin to kind of get woken up, massive influences. Jordan Peterson, the Kirk kind of assassination, like wakes you up. You hear of these men going back to the church, and then you kind of had this awakening, like, well, as they're returning, what message are they going to be confronted with? What are they going to experience as they're making their way back to truth? And you decide, okay, I'm going to put my flag into this fight by creating this movement, this mission of Frontline 21. What was kind of happening, maybe in your life, professionally, personally, that kind of called you, and why specifically the Frontline 21? And maybe unpack a little bit about where the core 5 came from, and we'll walk through some of that framework.
Yeah, so my life is a winding road of ups and downs, and victories and screw ups, man. So I mean, I think that's pretty much everybody's.
Welcome to the club, right?
So just, I mean, if you just even look to the last few years, so I'm one of those people who, I'm very driven in my career. My identity comes a lot from the quality of my career, the quality of the work that I'm doing and stuff like that. I grew up. My father and mother were they grew up in generational poverty, and so my father had to leave school in eighth grade or either starve to death. He had 13 brothers or sisters. There was not enough food. He had to leave school in eighth grade and go to work. My mother, she left school in 11th grade. Lost her father when she was young. Just a lot of bad circumstances for them. The most important thing that my parents ever did for me was they were candid with me about their lives and about the choices that they made, and they left me to say, if you're going to climb out of this situation that you're in, that you were born into, you're going to have to do something different than everybody else is doing, right? Um, Sometimes I get that right, sometimes I don't get it right, but uh, there's a lot of college in my background, a lot of studying, a lot of reading and stuff like that, and then a lot of pouring myself into my work. And sometimes that comes at the expense of my family. It comes at the expense of my health. And I'm vulnerable to all the other habits that men fall into, to overeating and all that kind of stuff, right? So over the course of my life, I've had moments of clarity, and I've had moments of complete fog and complete, just drift. And in the last few years, one of those has come. One of those was, I got really wrapped up in a project at work. It was a passion project, and all I could think about was the glory that I was going to get when I delivered this project. And in service to that project, I sacrificed my health. I gained about 50 pounds. I was not available to my children and my wife for about 2 years. I would be in the room, but I wasn't really in the room. I was on my computer working on that project and stuff like that. I woke up around September 2022 or 2023, and I was like, so I had that with what they call an inciting incident, where you see yourself for what you really are in that moment. And I started to just make some changes. And these were just organic changes. I wasn't anywhere near Frontline 21 at the time, but I started to get a step count in every day. I started to lift some weights again. I started to try to eat better. I started to try to not bring my computer home from work anymore and stuff like that. And over the course of about a year and a half, my life improved to some degree. Now it's not perfect. And I would tell you right now, I'm not a frontline 21 man. I want to be a frontline 21 man, but I don't think you ever really arrive. I think if you're really at work in the program, you're always pushing to be a little bit more dedicated to this, to these five principles, right? But as I started to sort of dissect the changes that I had made, I realized, I was sort of pursuing five areas, and I couldn't articulate these at the time. But I had been put into a leadership role at work. I was attending a men's group at church, was where the brotherhood came in. The leadership role had the servant leadership. That's where sort of the servant leadership idea came from. The brotherhood came from attending men's groups, where I really, for the first time in my life, uh, found comfort and value in being in church. Um, and then stewardship, like this idea that God's given me this body, God's given me this family, God's given me this talent, this intelligence, this money, and what am I doing with it? And then finally, the see, I said brotherhood, stewardship, sexual integrity. Um, this idea that anything that I'm doing that is becoming an idol in my life is taking me away from the things that are really important, right? And that's absolutely what porn becomes after a while, is as an idol. And then moral courage was what I really attributed to Charlie Kirk. Charlie was a morally courageous man. He was able to stand under the pressure. He wasn't able to be bought. In the end, what they had to do was kill the guy to silence him because they couldn't control him, right? Um, those five things were sort of organic in my mind. And then when I started thinking about these young men coming back to church, I was like, I need to come up with something that crystallizes these things so that they're easy enough for people to internalize. And so I spent a little bit of time just writing about it and figured it out, and then went to the Bible to gut check it. And it's there. It's God's blueprint for men. And I felt like I had something there. So that's where it all comes from, really.
Yeah. And guys, real quick, if you didn't catch that, moral courage, servant leadership, sexual integrity, brotherhood, and stewardship, the five core values of a frontline 21 man. And what we've kind of marketed, and I don't want to say commercialized it, but our five here are faith, fitness, finance, family, and freedom. We've kind of kept it a little bit more simple, a little bit of alliteration there with the F's, right? But faith, I think that's deeply rooted in moral courage, right? Standing on something that is rooted in a biblical truth, and knowing that there's a plan deeper for your life that's outside of your own full control. Fitness, I think stewardship there, right? You mentioned kind of the stewarding of the body. I think for me, the background in health and fitness, realizing the quickest path to identity transformation is through a physical transformation. Finances, I think that tied to stewardship, but also servant leadership there as well. It's not just what you do to create income, but what do you do with that income to benefit others that you're responsible for? Family, obviously family directly within your home, but it's more rooted in brotherhood. So the family outside of the home, which I want to speak to here a little bit with you. And then freedom, freedom from addiction, freedom from porn, walking in sexual purity, but also like freedom to not have idols in any area of your life, truly rooted in that biblical truth. I think the one that I see men needing the most, and they're all important, right? But I think 30% of men under the age of 30 right now, when asked, will report to having zero close personal friends, and a close personal friend being defined as that person you can call on in time of need. We have acquaintances, we have people that we run into, we have a social circle both online and in person, but there's a crisis of isolation right now at a time where we're more connected than ever. Men are feeling alone and isolated. In your opinion, in what you've seen, what happens to a man when he stays isolated, when he's missing that brotherhood? And you mentioned for you was getting plugged into men's groups. What happens when you begin to really connect deeply with men on a deep, intimate level?
Well, by the grace of God, I actually have grown up with a best friend. So I do have a best friend. We've been friends for since '99 now. I met him. I actually stumbled across him down in Orlando, which is about 6 hours from where both of us lived. Ended up that he only lived about an hour from me and so I started hanging out with him. And really, he's the co-creator of this with me. So over the last 27 years, I have benefited from from his investment in me, and he has benefited from my investment in him. Right? We hold each other accountable. And when I say accountable, it's not just around porn and stuff like that, but it's about like, hey, dude, you're sort of feeling sorry for yourself right now. That is not how you are going to make the dent that you want to make in the universe, right? You need to cowboy up a little bit here and stuff like that. And we just don't let each other fall into these patterns of justifying mediocrity. um I think when men don't have that, when they don't have somebody, first of all, that they can be candid with, right? Like to actually embrace candor and have trust in their life, that I can go to this person, and the consequences are not the same as you have when it's your wife or something like that, right? Like there's a layer of separation, I think, that of damage that you can do to a relationship with your wife, that a best friend can absorb a little bit easier. And there's a total other value that in terms of the best friend being your wife. But when men don't have a good male friend, and more importantly, when men don't have a community of men, and then more importantly, when they don't have that one male friend that they can talk to, they're really just sort of out there trying to figure it out on their own, right? Trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a man? And when you don't have accountability, what I've learned about human nature is I can justify just about anything, dude. If I can make myself feel better about just about anything that I've done within reason, right? So if I went and looked at porn today, well, I had a fight with my wife. I needed to blow off some steam. This is me relaxing so I don't take stress home to work. Whatever. You can justify just about anything. But what happens is the more that you justify that stuff, the more it takes hold, the more it becomes an idol, the more that you end up sacrificing faith and focus to this thing rather than these things over here. And what we're seeing right now, particularly in the wake of social media and the smartphone and stuff like that, is that people are spending more time curating a perfect facade online than they are building an intimate friendship offline. And we've arrived at a point in time where you don't have that guy that you can lean into and say, hey, what am I missing here, man? Why is this going wrong? Or what am I doing that's not getting me the results that I want to get? And so having that friend for me that's been extremely valuable in helping me elevate, first of all, out of that generational poverty. He and I come out of the same background, helping me slog forward when school got hard or when work gets hard or when I have a setback or something like that. Like usually I'll ping him and say, hey man, this is what's going on. And we'll have a conversation, and he'll do the same thing for me. And I think we've raised both ships simultaneously through that, through that. I mean, for lack of a better word, the cliche of iron sharpening iron, right? There's no iron to rub against if you don't have a best friend, if you don't have a community of men, right? And so, yeah, that's what I think you're missing. I think that's what men are missing most, is that brotherhood. And then the other thing is, if you think about things like cancel culture and stuff like that, all five of those things are about building strength so that you can be morally courageous, right? So moral courage is the ultimate outcome of those five shields. But moral courage can't stand alone. If your finances are a mess and your marriage is a mess and you got all this stuff over here, you're not stewarding, then you're vulnerable. If you're not leading as a servant, which means you're not absorbing the cost so that you can lead people somewhere, you're absorbing cost over them, then you're not going to lead anybody anywhere. So that's where servant leadership comes in. What is it? Sexual integrity. Like I said, if you've got these time bombs waiting in your life, and then brotherhood. If you don't have the brother, then you don't have somebody to stand with you whenever you do face that cancel culture or whatever it is that your ministry or your platform yields. Um, People are always going to try to destroy good things, right? Especially if they stand in contrast to the narrative that people want to believe. And so you gotta really fortify moral courage with those other four shields on there's two on one side and two on the other. If you look at the logo for Frontline 21, that center shield is moral courage. Those other two are the phalanx that protect that thing in the middle, right? And if any of those are weak, the whole phalanx breaks down. And so, yeah, that's sort of where that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned this best friend that you've had for, going on 27 years. I think a lot of men, when this conversation comes up or when they're looking for people to connect with, they immediately go online, right? We provide online groups and communities. I think there's a tremendous value in that, but I don't think it replaces that physical connection, like in-person relationship, the person you pick the phone up, the person that you do regular meetups with, you go have coffee, you go have a cigar, and there's something that happens when men are united, I think, in a room. And it's funny you mentioned 99. I around that same year, I met my best friend in high school. And still to this day, he is the number one person in my life. I literally was on the phone with him 2 nights ago, working through some issues for both of us. And we've, like you said, rubbed up against each other. He came to his faith way before I did and challenged me in a lot of areas and was a very, influential figure back in 2017, 2018, as I started to go down this walk and journey myself. I love, the framework here, the core five, from a philosophical perspective, I think it provides a solid framework. But I think you would agree with this. It's like, men need kind of like a tactical blueprint, right? So how do we take this kind of, you mentioned you're in pursuit of becoming this frontline 21 man. What does that look like in terms of like a tactical blueprint that we take this high level framework of like these core values that we're working towards? Now, how do we kind of bring it down to like, this is what it will look like on a day, week, month, year long kind of blueprint basis?
Yeah, I think that so we wrote the field manual for Frontline 21, which is really our primary offering right now. It's free. You can get it from Frontline 21, right? And what that does is it first of all, it gives you a sense of what your purpose in this world really is, right? Uh, a lot of men have no idea why they're even here. They just got born into this life, and life is spelled out as go get a job, go get married, go have kids, go die, right? Um, the but men are here for they're here for a bigger reason. They're here to steward culture forward, right? They're here to leave something better for the generation that follows. And that mission has sort of been taken from us. If you go to the field manual, you'll find things like, what does it mean to be a frontline? What is biblical manhood? What does it mean to be a frontline husband? What does it mean to be a frontline father? What does it mean to be a frontline servant, frontline brother? And you'll see also just discipline protocols, right? Like 10 or 11 things that if you understand these things and you understand that they're present in your life, you can begin to remove them from your life, like cowardice and compartmentalization and porn and this idea of justifying mediocrity and things like that in your life and stuff like that. I always believe that you can go through this world and you can operate for pure intuition, or you can go and you can read something and you can get some knowledge in your head and then you can apply it more tactically to things than if you're just operating from pure intuition and stuff like that. So just getting that language in your head will let you begin to confront yourself and say, hey, I am compartmentalizing things, or hey, I am uh you know uh being irresponsible in this spot, or I am sort of spiritually apathetic right now. um and if you're aware of these things, then you can begin to take action on them. You've got those 5 areas, and all 5 of those areas, if you're just your daily acts, whatever it is, if you're going to the gym, if you're taking a walk and you're listening to your Bible, if you're reading in your field, if you're sitting down and spending time with your kids instead of turning on the TV or giving them an iPad, all those things are daily acts of sacrifice, and they add up over time. James Clear will tell you that anything that you do today is either a vote for the person that you want to be, or the person that you don't want to be, right? If you can string together enough of those votes for who you want to be, over time you're going to change towards that person that you want. And then you get hungry for it, I think, right? You get hungry for that growth, and you begin to feel it. It's like you get in the gym and you start lifting, and all of a sudden, people are asking you for advice in the gym, and you got some efficacy and stuff like that. And you're like, oh yeah, this is good. And then you begin to crave it. The same thing with the Bible. Uh, the first time I read the Bible was about 2.5 years ago, and I immediately just picked up on patterns of human behavior in the Bible. If you look at the way that the Hebrews in the wilderness acted, they would come to God, they would drift from God, God would punish them, they'd come back to God. These patterns that show up all the way through the Bible and stuff like that are happening even today in our culture and stuff. And just having read it one time helped open up Christianity to me in a way that I had never really experienced it, because I had never just had the discipline to go and spend time in the Word and stuff like that. Um, Being more intentional with my wife and giving her more time, and realizing that I was letting her carry a lot of the burden of our children for those 2 years that I was talking about. Still not perfect, um, but this goes back to what I would say. I can justify anything. I can justify working 18-hour days because I'm doing it in the long run for the good of the family, right? But it doesn't matter that my family's suffering in the short term, right? I wasn't put here to have an easy life. I wasn't put here to be comfortable. And men weren't put here to be comfortable. But we've been told that's what we're here for, right? Find your comfort, find your donuts, find your Super Bowl, find your lazy boy, right? And you deserve it, right? Because you work hard and blah, 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 whatever that is. I think men feel that incongruency regardless of whether they ever take action on it. And if you're feeling it, Frontline 21 just gives you 5 areas to begin focusing on. It gives you 10 behaviors to start trying to get out of your life. And it gives you a sense of what manhood was meant to be, not what commercial culture has told us it should be, so that it can continue to exploit us or whatever it's trying to do.
You and your business partner are sitting down, and I'm sure you guys are, having these strategic questions. We're creating this blueprint, this framework, this field manual, which we'll link down there for everybody in the show notes. Make sure to grab a copy. You mentioned it's free right now. It's the best resource, best way to get plugged in and connected with what they're doing and building. I know many more things are to come for you guys, but as you were having these early stage kind of strategy sessions, like, who were you envisioning Frontline 21 being for? You mentioned Charlie Kirk. Charlie knew, like, his message, his mission was to connect with the young generation, that college age demographic, because that's where he saw his greatest impact having, right? And we've seen it play out in the work and just the cultural shift. As you guys were developing this thing, like, who were you seeing it in the hands of? And is that who is getting access to it? And then maybe speak to, like, the first round of guys that you've kind of got plugged into this. Like, what has been the feedback and what have been some of the results that these guys are seeing? I'm sure you're getting a lot of messages daily from guys that are plugged into the field manual.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. So very much that generation of young men that the Pew Research polls and stuff like that told us last summer are coming back. These are young men who have grown up in the last 20 years or so. They've grown up under the iPhone. They've grown up under social media. They've grown up under the whole, you do you, find your truth culture out there and stuff like that. They're they're finding all of that to sort of be empty and unfulfilling. Um, so I think first and foremost, and that generation has never heard anybody say, "Hey, you are vital and valuable to this culture." Everybody is telling them just how weak they are and how incapable they are, and stuff like that. Um, Charlie didn't do that. Charlie saw them as being influential, and they're the people who are ultimately going to grow into stewardship of you and me when we're old and sitting in the nursing home and stuff like that, right? Um, so I think first and foremost it's for them, but then beyond that, it's for any man who still wants to be relevant to this world, right? Any man who loves his children and wants to leave a better world behind than he found, and that kind of thing. So, you know, even boomers can even be involved in this kind of thing, but largely I'm finding a lot of my guidance, but aside from my best friend, I'm finding a lot of my guidance from the men who fought in World War II that are still alive at my church and stuff like that. They're the ones who are they're our deacons, they're leading our men's groups and stuff like that, and they're influencing our culture at church. I'm finding a lot of guidance from them, so they're still relevant. But these young men who are coming back to church, ultimately, they're the ones who are going to have to deal with all these sort of civilizational crises that we see coming down the pipeline right now, right? In the same way that we saw 18, 19, 20-year-old men step up in 1914 and go to war in Europe and fight for Western civilization there. And then the same ones that saw their way through the Great Depression and then saw their way through World War II. We had a generation of people who faced down three civilizational crises back to back. And those people built probably the greatest period of human prosperity in human history, not just in America, but in human history, right? And their sacrifice, they did that because they were anchored in their identities as men and women. They were anchored in their identities as Christian. They were anchored in their identities as Americans. And they willingly took on responsibility as duty, right? They just felt it as duty. There's not a lot of people who feel like they have a duty to anything anymore except for their own personal gratification, right? Their own personal achievement. And you've heard the meme, strong men make good times make weak men kind of thing. I think, when they're talking about the greatest generation of the 20th century, they're talking about those strong men who made that period of prosperity. And then what do we have that followed that? We had the Joe Bidens and the Schumers and the Pelosi's and all that came, and they inherited these good times, and they decoupled leadership with responsibility and things like that. And the world that they sought to build, for whatever reason, has led us to this state that we're in right now, where we've got unmitigated access to pornography and we've got people tearing each other apart in the streets and stuff like that. The other narrative that has been sold to me that we didn't get to cover, I want to circle back to that, is the idea that the only way I can make a difference in this world is if I show up on a protest line and start cracking skulls, or if I go overseas and I fight in some war or something like that, right? But what I believe, and this is something that that Jordan Peterson has espoused, and he got it from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote that, the line between good and evil doesn't pass through states and parties and stuff like that. It passes right through your heart, right? And where you hold that line and where you let that line drift is going to be the thing that shapes the culture, and it's going to be the thing that shapes your legacy, right? So a man can hold the line in his heart, and he can hold the line in his home, and he can actually make an impact in this world. And when he stands with a million other brothers who are doing the same thing, you see culture shift. You see that line stop drifting towards evil, and you see it start being pushed back towards where it is. Evil advances when men retreat, is essentially the idea, right? The more that we retreat into porn, the more that we retreat into work and addiction and all these other kinds of things, the more that we leave open for that. The more of a vacuum that we leave open for something to fill, and nature abhors a vacuum, right? Something's going to step in and fill it. And it's usually not the thing that we really wanted to fill it. And I think we see that in our culture right now.
I think it was Albert Einstein that said the world will not be destroyed by evil, but rather by those that sit back and watch like nothing is happening. That may be partially kind of misquoted there, but it's right in line with what you're speaking to here, right? It's like, don't pretend like it's not happening, but also to Jordan's message, it's like clean up your home before you try to go out there and change the world, right? You don't need to go out there and start a movement, start a podcast. Obviously, people will be called to that. Like if every guy on the block took care of his home and got that house in order, that block would look radically different in a very short period of time. We have a great friend of the show, Sathya Sam, that says, change the man, change the world. And I think all of these messages are interlinked, that the pathway to real societal change starts in each and every single man's home. And I think that's what you're speaking to, and that's what you're providing with this Frontline 21.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can just hold the line in your heart and your home, man, you are making more of a difference than most people are at this point, right? And if you're doing it and I'm doing it and my best friend's doing it and we scale it out, it does change. And what happens is within a generation, we stop sending people to Washington who are there to acquire under themselves before they get bugged off the horse. And they're actually there to make a difference, right? They're actually there, and they're not going to Washington and getting caught up in things like the Epstein files, right? Because they're going to Washington with integrity. The Epstein files is all about subjugation, right? It's about controlling influence and exploiting human weakness to do it. And so what we have right now is we have all these people who are compromised. They can't actually make a difference at all. All they can do is serve a master. And within a generation, if men are holding the line in their heart and their homes, we're going to have men that are growing up with that same sense of duty that they had back in the first part of 20th century. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the greatest generation of the 21st century change the trajectory of this century right now. I think we all can perceive that it feels like things are going bad. We can change that. I believe that. If I didn't believe that, then I'd do what everybody else is doing. I would acquire under myself as much as I can and hope I can insulate my family from the fallout of my apathy. Right. But I don't think that we're there yet. I don't think we've got to that critical mass yet.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important, to understand how these algorithms are designed, what's happening when you live your life disconnected from real world reality and consume everything through a screen. Is the apps, the algorithms know, in order to keep you locked in and engaged, it's that message needs to be rooted in fear, and then you begin to live in these information boxes, right? Where it's like that drives more anger and fear. So I'm going to show you more of that. But if you step out in the world, and this has been, you know, what drives the optimism for me is, yeah, I can live online, I can be in the trenches, but then when I step out and really look at the landscape with the Charlie Kirks, with the pendulum swinging, with more men coming to faith than ever before. I think Bible sales up 40% last year than the year before. Like, you see the message and you see the pendulum swinging, and I'm in a full agreement with you that we are shifting back, and whether it's going to be back to what it was, I don't think it is actually going to back to something better than before, because we're just at a different time, right? But when I look at the landscape of men, when I see organizations like what you've done, and when I see the impact that we're having in homes and in family as well, it's like that's the optimism that drives me, and the more men I can get on board with that. So frontline21.com, best place to get the field manual, guys. We'll have that link down there in the show notes below. What, if anything, Jason, can you share about what you guys have kind of coming down the pipeline that you're excited for? Anything you can share with us about what Frontline 21 is cooking in the pot right now?
Yeah. So right now we're trying to figure out what the next steps are. We know that there was tremendous resonance with the field manual, which is just a free thing that we can give people. Right. Frontline 21's got to find a way to sustain itself. And so what we're trying to do right now is trying to figure out, what does that look like? Is it an app? Is it content? Is it something for churches? I'm not sure. And we're actually, if you go to the website and you download the field manual, you'll end up in a email list that will give you a chance to speak into what comes next. And that's what we're really trying to do, is we're trying to figure out, what do men really, really want and need that would keep them engaged, that would help them to build this kind of life and legacy that I think men sort of dream about, whether it's consciously or not. I want, we want to leave behind something that was worth all the time and the toil, right? Um, so we're trying to figure that out right now. We do have plans for an app, and it will be very much about helping you turn those daily acts of formation into patterns that prove out your trajectory as a frontline 21 man. So that's we're trying to build that right now. And then beyond that, it's just, hey, the more people that you can tell about this, and the more that you can, take it to your pastor, show him. The frontline manual is easily used as a small group men's study for, 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever you want to stretch it into, that kind of thing. It's all free right now. But just want to get as many men aware of it as we can, because the vision is, if you can build 1 million men that are pursuing um, this kind of rigor in their life, you really can change culture, right? You can't kill 1 million men, but 1 million men can absolutely change the trajectory of this century. And so that's sort of where we're at right now.
In agreement, and I love it, man, and that's why I was excited to have you on here today, because I want to support, I want to be plugged in, I want to lift up as many groups and organizations that are speaking to men. Obviously, we have our channel and our flag deeply, planted in this space, but I'm not ignorant enough to believe that I'm gonna be able to change everybody's lives. There's going to be a place for everybody, and rising tide rises all ships, right? So, guys, check out Frontline 21, get plugged into the field manual, be on deck for all the exciting things coming down the pipeline. Like you said, you can play a role in what's coming next, which I think is the best way to build something. It's what we did in the early stages back in 2020 here as well. We launched Rebuilt Recovery, which has evolved into the Rebuilt Man, without any formal blueprint moving forward. Our first two clients literally built the curriculum that has now led 1,800 guys out of the depths of pornography addiction, and it's evolved in community and coaching and all the amazing things we're doing. So, Jason, I appreciate you coming on, man, sharing everything that you're doing. Powerful story, powerful work. Looking forward to staying plugged in and connected. As we wrap up the conversation here today, though, we love to end every episode with the same and final question. So the title of our podcast is called The Superhuman Life. You know, tying it in with maybe the mission of Frontline 21 and being a Frontline 21 man, Jason, how would you personally define living a superhuman life?
Living the superhuman life. I think living the superhuman life is living above uh, the minimum requirements of your humanity, right? It's so you can absolutely exist. You can absolutely move from point A to point B in your life and die. But if you want to live the superhuman life, you've got to embrace, you've got to earn rest, not pursue comfort, right? You've got to get out there and do something that's bigger than just gratifying yourself, bigger than just surviving, bigger than just watching out for number one. And uh, and and if not, then there's room for you can't have excellence without having mediocrity and measured against, right? And so yeah, I think that's about what I would say to that. And I really love the idea of the superhuman life.
I love that, man. I love that line, man. Earn rest instead of choosing comfort. Guys, Jason Walker, Frontline 21. Check out the field manual there below. And call to action here, in addition to that, is sharing this episode with your men's groups, with your circles. Get in the hands of your pastor. Print out a series of manuals. I think you said it's done in printable form, so it's very easy to share that. But let's get this message out there, guys. Let's continue to rise each other up. We appreciate you hanging out. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe if you haven't yet done so. And we will see you guys in the next one.